Sure.
Okay, so today we are going to discuss endogeneity. And first, let me turn on the presentation, entire screen. Yeah. So, can you see this screen?
Yes, sir.
Endogeneity. Okay. Now, if you look at regression models, we know that the main difference between regression and correlation is that correlation tests association and regression models are supposed to test for
Causal.
causal relation. Now, in modern day econometrics, by modern day I mean the last about 10 or 15 years, people have started questioning whether regression models really test causal relations or not. The basis for this questioning is endogeneity. The argument is that if there's no endogeneity, then regression models are fine. They can test for uh, the presence of a causal relations. But if you have endogeneity, regression model will just give you association. It doesn't give you causation. That is why I would say that endogeneity is at the heart of cross-section econometrics. It is perhaps the most important topic in your course. Now, if you are asked to define endogeneity, then the correct definition is that the assumption of OLS, that is expectation of U, the error term, and the explanatory variables xi should be 0. So endogeneity occurs when this assumption is violated. Okay, so expectation ux is not equal to 0. This assumption is violated in 4 cases: reverse causality, omitted variable, measurement errors, and selection bias. Now, when I've taken some interviews at the PhD level, I have seen that when I'm asking students, scholars, that what is endogeneity, then they simply say endogeneity is reverse causality. This, however, is not fully correct. Endogeneity is a catch-all term. It refers to a situation when expectation of ux is not equal to 0. So you should start by giving this definition and then state these 4 cases. Now, I think you know what these 4 cases means, right? Can you just go through what is reverse causality, omitted variable?
Yeah, reverse causality is when X causes Y, but also Y causes X as well. So it's a
Okay,
two-way relationship.
yeah. So x
Omitted,
causes y, but y also causes x.
right.
Omitted variable,
Omitted variable is when a particular variable, for instance, which is of a which varies from person to person but cannot be observed, is omitted from the regression and is captured in the error term, which shouldn't be the case. It should rather have come as a separate regressor.
uh,
For example, if the price depends on, if the demand of a product depends on, suppose, price of its own and price of a substitute or a complementary good, then if we just regress the demand on its own price and not on the prices of related goods, then that prices of related goods will come up in the error term, and hence expectation ui and xi will not be equal to 0.
Okay, now if you take a regression, right, you want to test the relation between y and let us say x1.
Mhm,
If you want to get the correct impact, then
mhm,
you should take the other control variables x2, x3, and so on.
mhm.
Is it possible to include all variables which are relevant?
No, it's not.
So you will always have omitted variables.
Mhm.
So in that case, we can we argue that because we always have omitted variables, we will always have endogeneity.
But the level of endogeneity should also be taken into account. Like how much does if it's a significant difference that a particular variable is making, then probably yes.
Okay, I'll come to this later on.
Okay.
Third is measurement errors in regressors. So you have x1, x2, but for some reason you're not being able to measure them properly.
Mm-hmm.
And fourth is selection bias. Have
Yes.
you, in the masters, did you cover the Heckman selection model?
No.
Okay, so I'll come to this later on.
Yes, but
Uh,
selection bias we've discussed it in part in the RCT model as well.
yeah, but it needs a bit more clarification.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so again to repeat, the definition should be based on the expectation. The E should be not be equal to 0. And the problem is that if we have endogeneity, then the OLS estimator is biased and inconsistent. Biased means that you will not get the true beta. And inconsistent means that if you increase the sample size, the bias will not reduce. Okay, so suppose we have a bias, but as you increase the sample size, the bias gradually decreases. So that means if you can increase the sample size to a sufficiently large level, the bias will become 0. The limit is 0, right?
Yes.
You have an unbiased state. But in endogeneity, this situation doesn't occur. Even if you increase sample size, the bias remains.
Mm.
It doesn't get reduced. So as a result of this, the model cannot be given a causal interpretation. Now compare with heteroscedasticity, for instance. What happens if you have heteroscedasticity?
The estimates are unbiased, but
Yes.
they are not efficient or consistent. No, they are consistent but not efficient.
Yes. So what do you mean by bias? You have the correct estimate. The
Yes.
beta hat that you have estimated,
Mm.
expectation of beta hat should equal to the
Beta.
correct beta,
Mm.
right? So there's no problem with beta. The relation between x and y is estimated correctly. Here, however, this estimate is wrong. So you don't know if it is uh, the true beta. Suppose you have estimated beta equal to, let us say, 1.
Mm.
So there are basically three possibilities. Beta can be above 1, the true beta. So
Mm.
that means you are underestimating.
Underestimate.
You can also overestimate. Beta is between 0 and 1. And if beta is less than 0, the interpretation is twisted.
Mm.
Instead of a positive relation, you now have a negative relation. Okay. So that is why we say that the regression model cannot be interpreted causally. Okay. Mm, okay. Now let's come to omitted variable. Oh no, omitted variable we'll discuss later. Let's come to selection bias. See, take a Minserian equation. The Mincer wrote a paper, I think in the 1960s, in which he wanted to calculate returns to education. So he's basically regressing wages or earnings on education and some control variables. Now, when you're taking this, estimating this model, what is the data for this? Are you taking the entire population or are you regressing this only for workers,
Only for workers.
right? Because earnings is not zero but
Hmm.
missing for the
Hmm.
non-workers. I mean, I've seen in one case that people had refused to state their reveal their earnings, so it is
Hmm.
missing, and so the researcher just put zero in all the cases and ran the regression.
That's not right.
Yeah, in fact, you can say that those people who have very high income,
Hmm.
they have a tendency to hide their income.
Hmm.
So basically, if you are very rich, I'm making your income zero.
Hmm.
I'm twisting the relation. If it was positive, it will now become negative.
It's a censored kind of a data.
No, anyway, this is a mistake of the
Hmm.
uh,
Researcher.
researcher. Now, what happens over here? That if you are taking only the workers, what does it? What is the implication of this? See, are you aware of the concept of reservation price or reservation wage?
The minimum wage,
The minimum wage for
the workers for which they will enter the
labor
market.
market. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that means each person will have a reservation wage.
Hmm.
Let us suppose your reservation wage is 100. You will enter the market only if you get a higher wage. Right? So that means we have some persons for whom W, if they had entered the market, they would have got W, but their reservation wage is higher. That is why these people are not entering the market. So if they had entered the market, we would have a set of very low Ws. Right. So I'm giving a very crude example. We can suppose that some people have income or earnings, let us say 100, 105,
Hmm.
95, like this, around 100. And those who are non-workers, unemployed, they have much lower, if they had entered the market, they would have much lower wages. So let us say that their wages are around 25, 20, 20, 30, 25, like this. Right. So when I'm taking the mean for only workers,
We
this
are
is,
overestimating the mean.
we are
I mean, the
overestimating the mean.
coefficient, yeah, the coefficient is overestimated.
Yeah, right. So in that case, we have to undertake a adjustment. And the adjustment process is two stage. In the first step, we find out a variable which will affect determine whether you work or don't work. Okay. So at the first stage, the decision is work
Binary.
or not. And obviously you run a probit model.
Hmm.
So this is regressed on that variable plus you have the other control variables. So this is the first stage model. You run it, and based on the results, you calculate something called the inverse Mills ratio.
Hmm.
In the second step, inst- you run the equation earnings on all the other factors plus this inverse Mills ratio. Okay,
So, what
so
exactly is inverse Mills ratio then?
inverse Mills ratio. Okay, I'll tell you. Mm, okay, so this is the distribution. And right, this is the wage. So when we are taking workers, we are taking only part of the distribution. So the inverse Mills ratio is we calculate this proportion divided by the entire CDF.
Okay, so that we get the
It-
CDF of the curve, new curve as 1.
yeah.
Yes.
So this was uh, there was a paper by James Heckman who won the Nobel Prize for this. So anyway, so this is selection bias, right? Acha. Now, why does endogeneity create a problem? So we take the Minserian equation. Earnings is regressed on years of education, error term. So the model is like this. X determines Y. The error term also determines Y. Fine. So the only effect of X on Y is the direct effect, right? Therefore, this assumption will hold. Now, U embodies all other factors which determine earnings other than education. And one of these factors is ability of respondent. So basically what happens is we have the same model, X determines Y, U determines X. But now this ability of the respondent, that will affect your years of education. This is a reasonable assumption.
Yes.
If you're more able, you'll not only earn more, but your years of education is likely to be higher.
Mm.
So the scheme becomes like this. The arrow comes in.
Mm.
So now you have got two effects. X, this is the direct effect, but this when we are estimating beta, this will include not only the direct effect, but also this indirect effect.
Mm.
So beta hat includes the direct effect which we want. My objective is to find out how education affects earnings.
Mm.
So I want to simply look at X and Y. But in this model, beta will give me not only the direct effect, but also the indirect effect. A more educated person is also likely to have higher ability and earn more. So basically, your earnings will increase.
Mm.
The impact on earnings captures the impact of education, which you want, plus the impact of ability. Okay, so this U comes. This is the indirect effect.
So most of the real life situations are like this only.
No, see, this is a case of omitted variable. Why is this important? Here, ability and education, both of them are correlated.
Mm.
So, as I told you, that all regression models will have to omit some variables, right? So, let us suppose that we have a regression model which is b1 x1 plus b2 x2, right? So, there are two variables, x1 and x2. Now, for some reason, we cannot capture x2, right? We don't have data on it, the measurement areas, whatever reason. So we drop x2 from the model and we estimate this model a plus beta 1 x1. So that means the error term now incorporates x2 as compared to this model. Here the error term does not include x1 or x2, right? But in
Yes.
this model, okay, now in this case, if x1 and x2 are correlated, then x1 and the error term will also be correlated.
Mm.
Therefore, the covariance between x1 and u will no longer hold.
Mm.
Okay. So omitted variable is not a problem. The problem occurs if the omitted variable is correlated with one of the regressors. Correct?
Right.
Understood?
Yes. Yes.
So there will always be omitted variable. Don't worry about that. But
Mm.
is it correlated with one of the regressors? Then you have a problem. So it's not a great handwriting, but you have to do with this.
Mm.
So here you have got two variables and we are dropping x2. Right. Now, as I've told you, x2 and x1 are correlated. And let us suppose the relation is like this. We have a linear relation. Right. So in this case, y equal to alpha plus beta 1 x2, beta 2. This is we are writing the correct equation. Right.
Mm.
So we put in this theta over here. Achha. Now you can see this beta 1 x1 comes in, but beta 2 del x1.
Mm.
Right. If we expand this, you have x1 from beta 1. You also have x1 over here, beta 2 del. So it is beta 1 plus beta 2 to del.
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
Therefore, you have the bias. This is the bias,
Mm.
beta 2 into del. The error term changes. That is not a problem. But your beta becomes wrong.
Mm.
So this is simple. If you take expectation, you will see that a bias comes to beta 2 del 1.
Mm.
So when will the bias be 0? Either if del 1 is 0.
Mm.
Okay, what does del 1 0 means? It means x1 and x2 are not
I'm not
correlated.
correlated.
And second is beta 2 is equal to 0. That is your omitted variable, the omission was justified.
Mm.
So I think this answers the omitted variable question also.
Yes.
So we have seen its bias. Over here, you can see this is the, sorry, yeah, it's the inconsistency proof.
Mm.
It's not very neat. So beta 1 is equal to this. Now over here, we are putting in beta 1 x1 plus u1, right? In case of mean y hat, it will be x bar and u bar.
That.
Okay. So
Mm.
x1 minus x into beta 1 x1 minus beta 1 x bar,
Mm.
right? The beta is constant. We take it out,
Mm.
right? So this becomes the variance. Sorry, uh, the numerator is also xi minus x bar whole square.
Healthcare.
So it's just beta 1.
Mm.
Over here, xi minus x bar, that is there. Now you have ui minus u bar, right? You just divide by n. This is
Correlate.
covariance between, yeah, by variance. And if we use p limit, then we have this relation. So only if covariance between u and x is 0, the bias will disappear.
Yes.
This is the multivariable proof. So go through it. I'll send a slide to you to go
Yes.
through it, but I'm not going to discuss this.
Yes.
It's basically the same. And this is the inconsistency part.
Mm.
So again, I'm dropping
That's
this.
something.
Yeah. So if you have endogeneity, how do we solve it? Now, the solution of endogeneity is adoption of the instrument variable method.
Just like we did like 2 SLS kind of a thing.
Exactly. Yeah. But I didn't tell you the story behind this. Let me
Mhm.
tell you the story now. So the solution was offered in Appendix B of this book by Philip Wright. So Wright was a graduate in economics from Harvard University. So it can be expected that he was a good economist. He learned economics well, but well, I don't know why for whatever reason, it turned out that he was not a good economist. So he got a job in a college in Illinois, but it was a very minor college. No one knows the name of the college. And obviously, he taught economics, but apart from economics, he taught three other papers. Can you guess what these papers are?
Apart from economics, probably uh, statistics or maths.
Neither.
Oh my god. Psychology?
No.
Then I don't know.
Gold. So he was a master's. He taught, yeah, mathematics was one, but he taught literature and education. And as I told you that in Appendix B, he pointed out that instrument variable could solve the problem. Now, Wright had a son. His name was Sewell Wright. And Sewell Wright was not like his father. He was a very well known population geneticist and statistician. Right. So people said that we have such a difficult problem, and how can a dad like Philip Wright solve it? It must have been his son who solved it. So there was a debate as to whose solution it really was. So people said that the book may have been written by Philip, but the son wrote the appendix. So there's something called stylometrics in which you can look at the use of word, use of the different punctuation marks, and every author is supposed to have a fingerprint. Fingerprint in the sense that the use of punctuation marks and use of certain words are typical to that author. So stylometrics indicated that whatever Sewell had done, he had not written the appendix. Subsequently, correspondence was discovered in the 90s, 20s. So this was round about when the book was being written, indicates that it was a joint discovery. So Sewell had collaborated with his father, but being a nice chap, loyal son, he said that okay, you can take the credit for it. Now, what was the context of the work? This is just a quaint story. I mean, we like to the stories about these discoveries. Okay, so Philip Wright wanted to find out. I mean, as you can see from the book, it's on tariff taxes. So he wanted to find out that if US had imposed a tariff, which they had actually done, so what was the impact of the tariff on demand? So the problem was he had to estimate a demand curve. He had data for price and quantity from 1912 to 1922. So he could take log and he could find out log Q alpha plus this estimation, alpha plus beta log P. And you know that beta is the elasticity of demand. So if the demand is elastic, greater than 1, beta is greater than 1, it means imposing a tariff would mean that demand would go down, significantly. Demand would go down, but depending upon the elasticity, the magnitude of decrease in demand could be estimated. Right? So look at this equation, right? You have data on quantity, you have data on price. You simply have to take log. What is wrong over here?
There is a kind of reverse causality also.
No. I mean, if you assume a demand curve,
Mm-hmm.
the Marshallian type, then
Mm-hmm.
quantity depends upon price.
Price.
What you are, I think, doing is mixing up Marshallian and Walrasian.
Yes.
So in demand curves, we don't have reverse causality. Depending on the demand curve that you want to estimate, you either take Q as a function of P or the reverse.
Are we also looking into zero demand?
No, there's no demand. There will always be some demand for a vegetable and animal oils.
Mm.
And people have to cook.
Can't really find out then.
Okay. See, how do we obtain price? Price is determined by the interaction of demand and supply, like this,
Mm.
right? So depending upon the non-price factors, the demand and supply curves shift. So let
Mm.
us take D1 and S1, right?
Mm.
So this is one price.
Mm.
Now, if you want to estimate D1, right,
Mm.
you need points like this, you need points like this, right? You
Mm.
need points along this demand curve.
Mm.
Now, suppose this is for the initial period. For the next month or week, whatever,
Mm.
the non-price factors may have changed. You
Okay.
remember the shift in demand curve, shift in
Yes,
supply curve.
yes, yes,
So the
yes.
demand curve shifts to D2. The supply curve also shifts to S2. So the initial price quantity combination is E1.
Mm.
In the next period, it is on a different, we are not interested in supply, but it is
Mm.
on a different demand curve.
Go.
In the third period, it is on D3,
Mm.
right? So in this case, you have a covariance between the random factors, the non-price factors, and
So
the
it is like
price.
the first example that I cited in the omitted variable case. That if the demand depends on price of its own and say price of related goods, and there's some other factors as well, the
Yeah.
control factors.
Hmm.
And if we just regress it only on its own price and we do not take into account the control factors,
Hmm.
then there's an omitted variable kind of a thing where the covariance between the x and the u's are not equal to zero.
But will the, let us say, price of substitute, will the
Mm.
price of substitute affect supply curve also?
No.
So it is some non-price factor, not prices.
Mm.
Prices of substitute will affect D1. So it's leading to a shift in D1, the
Mm.
D curves. Okay. So anyway, so the main problem is that you don't have points on the same demand curve.
Demand curve.
What you have is a set of points indicating price quantity combinations. They are like this. Each of them are on a different demand curve.
Demand curve.
Okay. So if you fit a line to this OLS, minimizing the deviation, it will
Mm.
neither give me a demand curve nor a supply curve,
Mm.
right? Okay. So the solution was find out a third variable. We have price, we have quantity, find out a non-price variable that shifted only the supply curve. Let us suppose this is Z1.
Mm.
So Z1 affects only the supply curve. not the demand curve. Okay.
Hmm.
So if Z1 changes, the demand curve is same as before,
Hmm.
but the supply curve shifts,
Right.
right? So at different points, we have different price quantity combinations.
Hmm.
Now you have points on the same demand curve.
Hmm.
Okay. So we can fit a line to E1 to E3 and we'll get D1. Right used rainfall in dairy region. So this will determine the productivity of supply. That if you have rainfall, uh, the grass will be higher, so the cows will be able to graze more, be more productive, but the demand curve will not be affected. Okay. So rain affects grazing and hence production of milk and butter, but not demand. So what are the properties of this instrument variable? The first property is covariance between Z and X is uh, covariance between Z and X is not equal to 0. So that means X determines upon Z.
Hmm.
There's a relation between Z and X. But Z affects only X, not Y. Covariance between Z and Y is 0. So if you can identify such a variable, we can use this calling it an instrument variable.
Hmm.
So if we take a general IB regression, Y is the dependent variable, X is the endogenous regressors, W is the exogenous regressors. So there's a problem with these W's. Okay, their W1 may be correlated with one of the omitted variables. W2 is related with another omitted variable, right? And Z is the list of instrument variables. Just 1 minute, please. Hello? Okay. So normally we try to estimate this entire equation. We regress y on x and w. Now,
So
if you
exogenous here means that W does not determine Y, or what does it mean?
no exogenous means that expectation of w1 or expectation of w and u is not equal to 0.
Okay, okay. Yes.
And in this case, x and u are
Equal
not
to zero,
correlated,
not
equal to
correlated.
0. Okay. Now, we have got m number of exogenous regressors. We have to identify at least m number of instruments, one for each. So if you have identified k instruments, um, sorry, I've made a mistake. Sorry, it's the reverse. Expectation of x and u is not equal to 0. There's no problem with the w's.
Hmm, right, sir.
Okay, so expectation of wu is equal to 0. Expectation of x and u is not equal to
Hmm,
0.
so-
Okay, so you have got key number of endogenous regressors. There's a problem in k regressors.
hmm,
And you have identified n number of instruments.
hmm,
So if this n is less than k, so let us say you have got 10 variables which are endogenous, but you have been able to identify only 5. You cannot apply IV.
hmm,
You have to find out at least 10 instruments. If you have got 7 endogenous regressors, at least 7. So if it is exactly equal to k equal to n, you have got 7 endogenous regressors and 7 instruments. Then we say it is exactly identified. And obviously, if you have identified more variables, instrument variables, you have a surplus, we call it over identified. And under identified means IV is not feasible. Clear? This is common sense actually.
Yes.
So we run a two-stage least square model. So we regress xj upon all the instruments. Okay. So that means x1 is regressed upon z1, all the instruments, all the w's also. X2 is regressed upon all the z's, all the instruments, and all the exogenous regressors. Right? So if we have 5 variables which are endogenous, we'll have to estimate 5 equations, 5 first stage equations. Yeah. So from each of them, we find out predicted xj. So we have x1, predicted x1, predicted x2, and so on. Then when we regress y, instead of regressing on x1, x2, and so on, we regress it on the
Yes.
predicted x's. W is okay, but on the predicted x's. Clear?
Yes.
Now the question is that why do we include W in the first stage? Okay. See, we are regressing x1 upon instruments and the variables for which there's no problem, the exogenous regressors. The reason is that if you are measuring beta for a particular x, right, you're measuring the impact of x given W. So the instrument should also capture this impact. Okay. So this is the end of the theory discussion for today. I have mainly taught from Stock and Watson. You can read this. And the practical part, which I'm going to cover now, is from Cameron and Trivedi. In the next part, tomorrow, I'm going to cover two things. How do we test for endogeneity? And second, it's often said the cure is worse than the disease. So what happens if you don't have a proper instrument? You still end up with a biased, inconsistent estimate. So that means the choice of instrument has to be done very carefully. The properties of this instrument, the two properties which I told you about, this one, relevance and exogeneity. Unless these are satisfied, you are in trouble. Okay, so we are going to cover that in the next class. But so far, do you have any problem? Do you want to discuss anything?
No.
Okay. Let me see. Hmm, yeah. Acha, if you read Stock and Watson, you will see that they discuss a cigarette case example. So this is the data for it, and this is the do file. So you can run it also. this is the data on medical expenditure. So we are looking at, there'll be, I think it's basically a scheme on health insurance. It was on Ph.D. So over here you can see this is a variable expenditure on drugs. So it's not like the Riya Chakraborty drugs. This is the proper medical.
Medicine. Yeah.
Yeah, Sputnik 4, Shaddux, and so on. So they want to find out what are the determinants of expenditure on medical drugs. And this is the list of explanatory variables. Dot CHR, age, female. This obviously you can understand, age, female. LINC is log income. What is dot CHR? This is the total number of chronic ailments. And Hispanic is the ethnicity. Let me say this one. It's either black or Hispanic. Okay. So since we'll be using this combination, we prepare a global X list. Now, possible instruments are SSI ratio, low income, firm size, and mult LC. Mult LC is whether the firm has branches in different locations. And SSI ratio is, well, very eliminating SSI by income ratio. Okay, so let's just have a look at it. Yeah. So if, I mean, obviously they will get, there's some missing data over here. So we do a simple look at them. You can see these two are binary and the others are continuous. Okay. So we run a correlation matrix with drug expenditure. Right. Remember that one of the properties was Y should not be affected by the
Instrument.
instrument. And you can see that the correlation is
Very good.
sufficiently low. Okay. Next phase. Okay, before that, let's just uh, let me just run this. Hmm. So the regression model is drug expenditure depends upon whether you belong to a union or not, and the other four control variables. And the argument is that if you belong to a union, the union is likely to provide you with some sort of medical insurance. And as a result of this, your drug expenditure will fall. So we run this model and get some results. Okay. Now the assumption is that union membership Okay,
Mm-hmm.
depends on is. Sorry, just give me a moment. Sorry. Union membership is correlated with the error term because one possibly some of there are some factors which will affect both union membership and whether you go for higher drug expenditure. Okay, I mean suppose you believe that you're more likely to fall ill. You need the support of your union,
Mm-hmm.
right? But your expenditure will also be higher. Now let us look at the structure. The command is IV regress and you have to write it out in full.
Mm-hmm.
IVReg will not give you the command. Then this is the method. You will see later on there are other methods apart from 2SLS. You give Y, within brackets you give the exogenous variable equal to instrument. These are the other endogenous variables. BC robustus, you are just going for robust standard errors. And first means
It
the
was
first
going
stage
to show
model
the
will
first
also be
step. Yeah.
reported. So let's save this also, right? So you can see that the estimate is minus 0.89. But here this is plus 0.07. So the causality itself has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the first stage model and this is the second stage model. So this is drug expenditure on this and this is the exogenous variable on the instrument and the control variables. Right.
The endogenous variable.
Endogenous variables. Yeah. So you can also okay, let's do this manually also. So if you want to do it manually, the method is and what was the instrument? It was SSI
SSI.
ratio. Okay, so you are regressing the exogenous variable on the instrument and other variables. Then you go for predict
H.
H, let us say H pred. Okay, then over here,
H pred.
so it's minus 89, right? Minus 89. First variable 0.012. This is 0.012, right? Now, note one thing, this SSI ratio is significant. If
Mm.
it is not significant, then it means
It's
your
not a good
instrument, yeah. So, what do you call this property?
relevance.
Relevance. And this correlation had told us that it is also, it satisfies the exogeneity property
Epigenetic.
also. Okay. So now what we have done, I'll show you the do file. We have experimented with different uh,
Instruments.
instruments. I've put in quietly so that you don't get the results.
Mm.
And then we prepare a summary table, including the OLS. So you can see that the OLS gives completely wrong estimates. I mean, in three of the cases, SSI ratio, multiple locations, firm size, beta should be actually negative. In this case also, it's positive, but there's a difference. But low income doesn't seem to be a very good instrument, right? This is the T ratio. So, except in this case, where the instrument is not very good, if you compare with the other three cases where the instrument is good, there's a, I mean, the OLS is completely wrong and misleading. Okay, now this is two-stage least square, but you can also run this with IV regress. Sorry, you can also IV regress with generalized method of moments. So you're getting 2.93. So we are looking with firm size. So 2.93. Okay, so it's close. GMM 2SLS is closed. The advantage of using 2SLS is that you will always get a result. But in GMM, in some cases we found we didn't get a result. This is a limited information maximum likelihood. Again, you can see you're getting the same result. And this is a jackknife, but yeah, it's also getting jackknife. But here you
Insignificant.
can see T is insignificant. Here also T is same. Okay, so I have bypassed some important problems. I've assumed that you have an ready-made instrument. Given this instrument, it's very easy to find out the model. Okay, so I'll stop the lecture now because the next part is somewhat complicated, and I found that people find it a bit difficult to follow.
So,
So yeah,
I remember that you talked about a post-regression command Endog. So, should that be used to check whether endogeneity problem exists or not?
yeah. So the problem is that you can't run an OLS and test for endogeneity.
Hmm. So,
You
every
have
time I run a 2ASLS, should I use that as a post-regression command to see
you
whether
can't.
the
Sorry, 2SLS after 2SLS, you should check whether there's really endogeneity or not.
right, right.
But there's another problem
Mhm.
over here. What is the R square?
It's nothing. It's a dot. It's blank.
This is the GMM.
Mhm.
Again, R square.
Blank.
Only jackknife, we are getting something, but it is negative.
Negative.
Sorry. The reason is pretty simple that if you, what is the definition of R square?
Uh, R square is the fit, the ESS by TSS.
ESS by TSS, right?
Yeah.
Or if you want to use RSS,
1
how do we
minus
write it?
RSS by
1
TSS.
minus RSS. Or what we can write is TSS minus RSS in bracket,
Yeah.
right? Now
Yeah.
over here, we have actually got two equations, right?
Mm.
Right? First stage and second stage.
Mm.
The RSS is calculated for the first stage,
Mm.
and the TSS is calculated for the second stage.
Okay.
So as a result of this, right, there's no relation. See, if I take TSS as 1, this
Mm.
is equal to explained 1 plus residual 1,
Mm.
but there's no such relation between RSS 1 and
And
TSS.
two.
So this can be negative, as you can
Mm.
see in the jackknife case.
Mm.
So even if you have RSS, it doesn't give you anything.
So we shouldn't be
I mean,
looking at
at least
transfer.
in an IV regress model,
Mm.
even if it is positive, this is not ESS2, right?
Mm.
So you don't know what is ESS2,
Mm.
and therefore you can never find out what is R square.
Mm.
So when you're getting the R squares over here, when you're getting the R squares over here,
Mm.
you're getting them because you are running a two-stage model, right?
Mm.
This is an OLS. Sorry. Uh, this is I will press. Yeah. This is an OLS. So
Mm.
you're getting R square 0.0761,
Mm.
right? 0761. The second model is 0.06. 0.1780. So over here, yeah. So this is basically it will be TSS2 minus
That
RSS1.
is one.
That is why you're getting a wrong result.
Mm.
So if you're using IV regress, just don't look at this. It can be high, it can be low, immaterial. Just
Mm.
focus on the Z values,
Mm.
whether they're significant or not. And second, are you getting the expected results or not?
Mm.
Now, don't want to discuss the test for endogeneity today.
Mm.
I just want to mention two things. One is that it's a Houseman test.
Mm.
When do we use Houseman test?
Houseman test is for selection by. No, that's Heckman. Houseman test. Don't remember.
Has
It was
NDA,
when. Yeah,
yeah,
panel data.
panel data. Actually, a Houseman test is not a test for either endogeneity or for panel test.
Okay.
It is a test in which you compare regression models for two different regression coefficients for two different models.
Okay.
So it can be used in a variety of situations. One of them is panel data, and
Mm.
the other case is endogeneity.
Okay.
Now, in panel data, the problem is that in many cases you will find that you might not get the Houseman results.
Mm.
So in these cases, you have to do a sigma more, sigma less. Even that might not work. Here, however, we have generally found that the Houseman test will give you results.
Yes.
So it's not as problematical as in the panel data case.
Mm. There we use it to compare fixed effects and random
Yeah,
effects.
which model to choose?
Which model to choose,
Yeah,
right?
so it's basically you're comparing the coefficients. The
Mm.
test is based on the comparison of the beta vector.
Mm.
Here also we take the this vector
Mm.
from the IV model and
Mm.
the OLS vector and we compare them.
The first stage or the second stage? The second stage.
No, obviously the second stage.
Yeah. No, because you showed the first one, so I asked.
Okay. So uh, you can get the nuance of the test. The
Hmm.
Houseman test compares the coefficients, right? Now, if the OLS is correct,
Hmm.
will the OLS and instrument variable results
No,
be different?
no.
Not much difference.
Hmm.
But as you can see in these results, if there's endogeneity, the difference will be substantial.
Yeah.
So the Houseman test works on this premises.
Hmm.
It compares between the two coefficients. If the difference is large, you have endogeneity. Otherwise, it's not.
Hmm.
So that is one thing. Second is no, that's all. Okay. So remember that the first stage is important because we want to see whether it is
The instrument is
whether we have
relevant.
instrument is right or not.
Hmm.
But this is the model that we require.
Hmm.
The second stage. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Now, if you are up to it, what I can do is I can cover a little bit of the NSS data also.
Hmm.
So it won't take much. Just want to, yeah, this NSS. Huh, huh. না ওটা খেয়ে নেবো গোলাপ খেয়ে নেবো Okay, so can you see
Yes.
the slide? Okay. Okay, so the NSS is a periodic all India level survey, which is undertaken by National Sample Survey. They have two types of survey. One is undertaken every 5 years. It is called a large sample, or it is often called a thick sample.
Hmm.
So they have, when they undertake this thick sample, their survey is for uh, consumption expenditure, and second is for employment and unemployment.
Isn't this closed employment unemployment data?
You mean the periodic labor force?
Yeah, I mean, I think periodic labor force or the NSSO employment unemployment data. It was in the news that the data is not being released by the government anymore.
Yeah, I mean the last results gave out showed
Hmm.
that unemployment had increased.
Hmm.
So the data will never come out.
Yes. In fact, I remember Shashwata sir also saying that this is like now the government has stopped releasing the data on employment.
Were you did you attend a lecture by Amitav Kundu?
I have attended a lot of seminars, I mean webinars, but I don't remember the names. But I think I have.
I think it was in before the pujas last year,
Oh, no,
August, September.
no.
Okay, he was actually working with an NSSO.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'll come to that later on.
Hmm.
So one is the thick sample every
Hmm.
5 years. So using this consumption expenditure data, poverty estimates are prepared. And the other is the small sample survey. They are undertaken using a smaller survey every 10 years on a particular topic. So on health expenditure, the survey was in 95, 2005, 2015, education 7 and 17, like this. Plus you have surveys on tourism, migration, I think slum survey, and so on. Now, why is it important? See, in census, you have the entire population. Mahalanobis had shown that without going into a census survey, you can go for a smaller survey, which is less costly, quicker to undertake. That will give you results which are quite comparable with the population estimates. Okay, so instead of, see, why is the census undertaken every 10 years? It is undertaken for 1 year. Just analyzing the data takes 7 to 8 years.
Hmm.
But if you work with a smaller sample, everything, the cost comes down, time comes down, you can take policy decisions.
Hmm.
The important question is the estimate correct? Malami showed that if you take under certain conditions, it's possible to arrive at reasonably correct population estimates. So that is why the NSS undertakes poverty and unemployment surveys, and plus the data is useful for us. Now, one of the important concepts is employment. Okay. So if you look at the population, you have a group of people, students, housewives, pensioners, beggars, who are not in the labor force. They are not engaged in productive work. Unemployed is they are not working but looking for work. And employed is they are engaged in productive activity. So the labor force comprises of unemployed plus employed. The workforce is only the employed. Sometimes then each criteria is added. 15 years. Otherwise it becomes child labor, which is banned. Upper age criteria 60, 65. Now NSS will look at your economic status. So these are the codes and these are the categories. Worked in household enterprise, self-employment, own account worker. So these are basically the first three is mainly the informal sector. So this is own account worker. You're working, you're the employer, you're the only worker. Here you are employing some people. And here you're working in a household enterprise. So that means if I open a photocopy shop in which I photocopy run the photocopy machine, this will be I will be an own account worker. If I employ someone, he will be an employer. Sorry, I will be an employer. If I hire someone, will he be a worker in household enterprise?
No,
Why?
worked in household enterprise would be, I mean,
It's the same Xerox machine shop.
okay.
So afternoon I go to sleep and
Hmm.
he runs the photocopy shop.
Okay. Won't he be a, I mean, like a salaried or a wage employee or a,
Yeah,
something like
he will be in this salaried class. But
mm.
suppose I tell, um, I ask my cousin or I ask my brother to help out. He will be
Then
an unpaid family
fine.
worker. Apart from that, we have casual worker in public works and in other type of works.
Mm.
So 11 to 51 comprises workers. Okay. Acha, wage and salary means you are getting fixed income.
Mm.
It doesn't depend upon the number of days for which you're working.
Mm.
Acha. This is unemployed. You're not working, but you're seeking work or you're available for work.
Mm.
These are uh, outside the labor force. This is student, housewife.
Mm.
So these are different categories, rentiers, pensioners, and so on.
Mm.
Okay, so if I take this, this is workers. If I take this, it is labor force.
Yes.
So if I want to find out workforce participation,
Mm.
the numerator will be 11 to 51.
Okay, yeah.
But if I want to take labor force, it will be up till 80,
Yes.
81. Now, what they do is the surveyors come to you and ask that in the last 1 year, what was your main activity? Were you a student? Were you working? What were you doing?
Mm.
And depending upon your answer, they get your principal status.
Mm.
Then they ask that, okay, were you engaged in any other activity in the last year?
Mm.
That will give your subsidiary status. So, for instance, if you take 2019, or let us take this year,
Mm.
you are a student. That is your principal activity.
Mm.
You will be in the category 91.
Right.
Now, after COVID, suppose, or let us say that during this time, you also help out your dad in his firm.
Mm.
But your
And
main activity is studying.
mm.
So you have a principal status
Mm.
91, subsidiary status is
29.
yeah. This will give you principal and subsidiary status.
Mm.
Then they asked that in the week preceding the survey, what was your status? That is called current weekly or just weekly status.
Mm.
And they have some additional categories like that whether you've fallen ill, you didn't work, and so on. But it basically follows the earlier format. And then they have a daily status. What was your main activity in the day preceding the survey?
Mm.
So, what were you doing yesterday? Okay, so based on this, we get estimates for the annual. This is the annual unemployment. This is the weekly unemployment. This is the daily unemployment. We generally don't use this. We use either this or this.
Mm.
Now, when the unemployment estimate came out, the argument was that the sampling method had changed compared to earlier rounds. See, in NSS, what we do is we undertake a stratified random sample. We take the population and divide this into different strata,
Mm.
right? Previously, it was being done by education levels.
Mm.
Sorry, previously it was done by expenditure levels. So that means we divided the population into, let us say, 10 expenditure classes. And from the bottom class, we took a certain number of members, N1. From the second class, we took N2, and so on.
Mm.
And the strategy was to oversample the low income households. See, in a random sample, what is the definition of a random sample? Every
Equal.
unit has the same probability. But in a stratified sample, this may not be true.
Mm.
I may want to oversample the low income households.
Mm.
Now, in the last round, what they had done, NSS had done was they stratified according to educational levels.
Mm.
Will the expenditure and educational strata will it be same?
No.
So the argument was by the central government was that you are not comparing between similar samples.
Mm.
That is why the estimate of unemployment will be wrong.
Okay.
Now on you can compare, but not before.
Mm.
This, however, is not true. See,
Mm.
when we take a stratified sample, we also use something called sampling weights.
Mm.
See, I told you that if you belong to the low income households,
Mm.
you have a high probability of being selected.
Mm.
Sampling weight corrects for this weightage.
Mm.
As a result of this, if you just run a tab or you find out mean for NSS data, it will simply give you the sample estimate. It is not applicable to the entire population.
Mm.
Mohalanabish had shown that if you make the same calculations but adjusting for sampling weights, you can get a reasonable estimate for the population.
Okay. So, for instance, if there are, say, suppose three classes,
Yeah,
lower income or lower expenditure, then the medium, and then the high ones.
yeah,
And suppose the selection is such that from lower expenditure we take 60%, from medium 20%, and the
30,
remaining
let's say
20,
30,
yeah, 30, and then the remaining
10.
10% from the high. Then we'll have to divide each of this by the respective probabilities to correct for the sampling weights.
Yeah, actually, the method is more complicated, but
Yeah,
you're
it's just a
getting the
simplified
general idea.
version. Yeah.
So that the chances are more when
Mm.
you're going to the national average, you
Mm.
reduce the weightage to this
Mm.
part.
Mm.
As a result of this, the method of stratification becomes irrelevant.
Mm.
If you find out the simple unweighted figures, they are not comparable. It
Mm.
depends on whether you're using the same strata or not. But if you're using weights, sampling weights,
Mm.
then it becomes the same, whatever strata you use. Now, when NSS releases the unemployment data, they obviously use the weighted data. So that means it is really comparable with the earlier rounds. Even though the method has changed,
Mm.
we are not using the strata. We are adjusting. The adjusting methods may be different. The
Mm.
weights will be different.
Mm.
But in both cases, we are arriving at the national average. Okay. And the national average is same if they are
Mm.
comparable.
Mm.
So the central government argument was not correct. Acha. Now, in NSS, we often calculate monthly earnings. Acha. What NSS gives us is they give us the how much money you have earned in a week. They have some schedules, and if you go to the what is called the weekly status, I think it's level one, two, one, two, three, four, five. I think to level 6, block 6 or block 7, they will ask you how many days have you worked in the last week.
Mm.
So they will give you three options. It can be 0, you haven't worked in a particular day.
Mm.
See, they will ask you per day.
Mm.
So today is Friday. So they will ask you, what did you do on Thursday? What did you do on Wednesday? And so on. You can answer, say, I didn't work. So it's 0. You can say, I worked the entire day. So it will be 1. And third is, you worked half the day. In that case, it will be zero point 0.5. So when you are calculating for the week, it will be like this, starting from 0, zero point 0.5, 1, 1.5. And what is the maximum? 7. Acha. Now the problem is they use an ASCII file to enter the data. In an ASCII file, you cannot enter dot. So 0 is entered as 0, but zero
Mm.
point 0.5 is entered as 5.
Mm.
So basically you are multiplying by 10.
Mm.
So 1 will be 10. 1.5 will be 15. And how many days can you work?
7.
70. 70.
Mm.
7 into 10. Acha. Now in the case of wage and salaried earners, right, you are
Mm.
earning, you they are giving the daily earnings, right? Rather what they give is they give the weekly earnings. I've told you they give the weekly earnings.
Mm.
So you simply have to find out the daily earnings, divide by 7, and then
Mm.
you multiply either by 30 or 31,
Mm.
right? If you want annual, you multiply by 365. Clear?
Yes.
Acha. Now one thing, when you are dividing by the weekly cash earnings by days, remember you are dividing by 70, not by 7, right? So the actual formula is 30 into weekly earnings into 10 divided by number of days.
Mm.
Okay,
Yes.
we are adjusting for this extras 0.
Mm.
In case of other workers, you have to find out, multiply by, uh, you find out the daily earnings just as before.
Mm.
Then what you do is, suppose you have worked 4 days in the month, sorry, in the week.
Mm.
So the assumption is you work in the same proportion.
Mm.
So you just scale it up. You have worked 4 days in 7 days. How many days will you work out of 30 days?
Mm.
So you multiply.
Into 30 by 7.
Yeah, or often you just do it multiply by 4 also. Okay. Now next is the poverty estimate. So obviously they use a very simple method which is headcount ratio,
Mm.
but Stata, I'm using Stata, you can find out other measures also. You
Mm.
know what the headcount ratio is.
Yeah.
The important thing is what is the poverty line.
Mm.
Now Sukhatme had pointed out that you require your daily minimum calorie consumption should be 2250. So the poverty line is estimated in such a way that you can consume food to attain this amount of calorie.
Mm.
So every 5 years, you re-estimate the poverty line. Then, like this is Dandekar Rath's poverty line
Mm.
based on different prices. You can just see this is monthly, this is yearly. Okay.
Mm.
So this is urban, and so on. Now another thing is how do we record consumption? What should be the recall period? What they do is they have a list of different items. So they, for some items, they ask, what was your consumption in the last 7 days?
Mm.
In the case of some items, they ask, what is your expenditure on the last 30 days? And in some cases, they take annual expenditure.
Mm.
You can see the logic of it. If I want to find out, for instance, you may have purchased a computer, an
Mm.
AC machine.
Mm.
So in that case, it's likely to
Annual.
be annual.
Mm.
And obviously, we aggregate the expenditure after making suitable adjustment. So in case of 7 days, we bring it to annual. Monthly, we multiply by 12.
Mm.
And so we get the total annual expenditure. And this is reduced to monthly expenditure.
Mm.
Now, what happened was in the 43rd and 50th round, these were the consecutive major rounds.
Mm.
No, sorry, 43rd, 50th round, consumption was recorded for a 30-day recall period. In case of certain items, again a 30-day recall period was used, and combined we got estimates for 30 days. In the 55th round, food items 7 days, right? Clothing 365 days and 30 days. And these were combined to generate estimates for 30 days. And what happened was, once the estimates came out, it showed that poverty had declined by a huge margin between the 50th and 55th rounds. So only within 5 years, there was a almost 10 to 15% decline in poverty. And this led to the Great Indian Poverty Debate. In fact, there's a book called by this title.
It is obvious because in the like nobody does shopping. Like most of the people do not do shopping of durables every 30 days.
Yeah.
It
So
might be
one
a simple,
possibility is the difference in the recall period.
yes, and its
And
aggregation.
yeah, so now people started jumping about that we can't accept this estimate.
Mm.
And people said it's not comparable. Actually, poverty has either increased or poverty did not decline by the this 9.9%. See, 10% in 5 years is huge.
Mm.
Now, the good thing was the central government did not interfere in the debate. They made a defense. Any government will defend itself.
Mm.
But those who were criticizing were not attacked in any way. The full debate took place in public life, in the academic circles. It was published in journals, EPW, international journals. Everyone had access to the data, and people made different claims. There was one group who was saying the government is correct, another group said government is wrong. Then the government decided that okay, this is going on for too long. So they called Sir Angus Deaton and John Resch, and they gave them the complete data. See, what they had done was they had collected the data using both recall periods, but only one recall period was publicly revealed. So they gave the confidential data to these two people, both of them having impeccable reputation. If anything, they are anti-establishment, particularly John Resch. Resch and Deaton recalculated everything using the confidential data. Now this is comparable with the earlier rounds, and they found that poverty really had declined by almost 10%. I mean, obviously there was it was not strictly 9.9, but it was close to it. So it indicates two things. One, transparency is very important, but there's what is the recall period is something which can generate a lot of controversy. Then around 2009, Tendulkar, Suresh Tendulkar committee was established. The objective was to recalculate poverty lines, not using Sukhatnit's measure, but using a completely different method. See, Sukhatnit's measure was based on just food, calorie consumption. Here, expenditure on health and education was also included. The calorie consumption also was changed from 2250 to the calculations by NSS. And Tendulkar found out that the urban poverty line should be 4824 per month for a family of 5 persons. In rural area, it is 3905. And it was found that if you adjust for prices, it is close to the internationally accepted poverty line. So from 2009, which is the 68th round, 68th round was in just before this. So 60th round was did not use this Tendulkar committee, but from the sorry 66 from the 68th round, which was undertaken in 2012, this poverty line is being used. In the last round, that is the round which was not revealed, they are using a new type of method. In some districts, data on only 30 days item will be collected. In some districts, data on only last year items will be collected. You will have recall periods for different items, districts, and they will merge the data. So that means they will go to you and ask, they will collect data on expenditure on certain items for only 30 days. Okay. They will come to me and ask me, collect data from me for another set of items using a recall period of 1 year. Then they will merge. They will take the 30 days item from you and put it into my income group. They will take the annual recall and plug it into your data. So they were trying to do this and see whether the estimates were being correct or not. So I don't know the result of this exercise. So this is what you need to know about the NSS survey. I'll send the PDF to you. You won't use NSSO. In fact, now on, there's no point in using NSSO, but it's a very important sample survey and possibly the most important sample survey in the world. And you should know something, the basic concepts, the definitions of employment, unemployment from this. I'll also discuss the IHDS very briefly. That is also being used nowadays. So this is undertaken by Maryland and NCER. Two rounds have been taken, 2004-5 and 11-12. Third round has been, um, I think it has been uh, executed now. I don't know. I don't know the status right now. So the third round will come out after 3-4 years. It is a longitudinal survey. That means they are going to the same group of persons and serving them after 6 or 7 years. So you can trace the changes in their lives. Right? But what is the problem? You can have attrition. Some people may leave the area, they migrate, and so you cannot locate where they are. So IHDS, these are just figures. It was a survey of 41,000. In the second round, IHDS 2, they re interviewed 83 persons. of these households.
Hmm.
Okay. Acha. Now, households, they can be two things. Households can leave the area, migration.
Hmm.
They can also split. So, in other words, a father has three children,
Hmm.
they form a household.
Hmm.
After 6 years, two of the children leave and form separate households. So, if they are located in the same village or town, they can be also included in the sample.
Hmm.
But if they migrate, you can't do anything. Okay. So, IHTS2 includes 83% of these households, plus you have a replacement sample of 2000. So, the total sample is slightly higher, 42%,
Replacement
152.
sample means the additional
Replacement
support.
is you have a fresh households who have
Okay.
not been surveyed in round one.
Okay.
So these are just figures. Have a look at them. The important thing is if you're working, you have to keep this in mind. What has happened? How has the survey been undertaken in different periods? So they have different files. They have an individual file. They have a household file. They have an eligible women file. So from each household, they take only one women and they collect information on detailed information on this women. So the problem with IHDS is compared to let us say NFHS. See, NFHS has a detailed structure which more or less remains same across countries over rounds. But in case of ISDS, you will find that in some cases some information is over here. In the next round, it is given over here. So the information where the information is located will vary from round to round. But this is not the case of the NFHS survey. NFHS or Demographic Health Survey. We call it NFHS in India, but internationally it is called DHS.
Hmm.
So if you're not working with financial data, census data, NSSO data, IHDS, these are some of the data that you will require. Shashwat has covered some additional databases, I think SRS,
Hmm.
but SRS is mainly required if you're studying death, birth, child sex ratio, if you're going for a demographic study.
Hmm.
But if you're going for an economic study, then ISDS or NSS will be useful. Okay, so I'll stop at this point, almost 2 hours.
Yeah.
And this endogeneity part will be a test, NSEM test. Okay,
Yeah.
the data part will be our verbal test.
NSEM, there'll be two different exams for practical and theory or together
No, we will take only on theory.
on theory, not on practical.
Practical, we will. I've already given you an assignment
Hmm.
on time series,
Hmm.
interrupted time series.
Hmm.
So I'm taking the work that you have done
Hmm.
for the migration paper.
Okay.
So I think has ma'am discussed panel did given you assignment? No, sorry, you did the factor analysis, right?
Yeah, the factor
Did
analysis.
you submit the assignment?
I wasn't given any assignment.
No, the students were given. Those who participated were given an assignment.
No, I did not get any assignment. I think the presidency students did not get any assignment, something like that.
Okay. Anyway, so
Hmm.
lab, we will take some tests. We have already taken one test.
Hmm.
Endogeneity also, I'll give you some assignments. You will have
Yeah.
to do it.
Yeah.
That is part of your econometrics.
Hmm. Hmm.
Data, I can take a Viva when you
Hmm.
want.
Okay.
So I'll send a slide to you,
Hmm.
but please don't share it with other people.
No, no, I will not.
And
Also on the RCT part, as you're going to to give me an assignment on that as well.
yeah, let me just stop recording.